David Bombal coming to you from South Africa, where I'm enjoying a lot of good sunshine, escaping the cold of England. I'm on a call again with Hank Preston, and he's now in Ireland. Hopefully the weather's okay there, Hank.
It is. I'm actually here in Ireland meeting with some of our Sandbox engineering team. I recently changed roles within Devnet to focus in on our Sandbox platform and bring network automation and programmability and net DevOps and all of these topics I talk about from a theory perspective to our actual Sandbox platform. And so I'm here for a few days meeting with some of our engineering team, kind of doing some brainstorming and planning for the future. And we have lucked out. The sun's been shining. It's brisk, but it's much nicer than back home in Ohio in the States. So
that's great. So Hank, when we were talking about this call, we decided to talk about VIRL, and you've told me that VIRL is very different perhaps to what it was a few years ago, and there are a lot of misconceptions about Cisco VIRL. I've had the same thing with GNS3. I'm a very big GNS3 user. But hopefully in this call, you're going to show me the power of VIRL and why the misconceptions about, the limitations of VIRL are incorrect.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a lot of stuff that I'm hoping to go through. And to be fair, right, I've been using VIRL since I think it first came out. And in some of the early days, it certainly had some of its challenges, I think, like any new platform has. But over the several years since it's been out, there's been many improvements, and the product team continues to add new features. And I've actually had a chance to look at some of the upcoming releases that are due out over the next quarter, 2 quarters, and I'm really encouraged about what's coming. But what I want to show today is actually just current state, how I use VIRL as a network programmability and net DevOps engineer, and some of the pieces and the ways that it works into my workflow. And we can tackle some of those myths and comments and things kind of as we go through. So as always, David, I'll encourage you to keep me honest, ask the hard questions. Like anything, I don't think any product's perfect, but I think VIRL's gotten a bit of a bad rap recently, and it doesn't quite deserve it, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, the comments that I see, and I'm sure you've had many different types of comments, is that it's impossible to set up, very difficult. There's an integration between a GUI that you have to install on your computer, and there's a VM. Just sounds really overly complex, but from what you've told me, that's actually incorrect.
Yeah, so parts of those are there. So we're not going to do the installation piece. The installation has gotten easier. You can download the bits. You can get all those as they go through. I'm actually going to start out by saying, as is typical, right? We'll pitch a Devnet sandbox, and so I'm using for this demonstration one of our Devnet sandboxes, and it's the one that I'm using today is our OpenNXOS with Nexus 9KV that happens to run on VIRL. So prior to our call starting up, I did a reservation, so we can see I've currently got an active reservation in the corner. And what this reservation gives me is I don't have to do the installation. I don't have to find a server to host it or host it locally on my laptop. It's hosted in one of our sandboxes. In fact, this one happens to be hosted in our Galway sandbox, which is here in Ireland where I'm at. And so once I reserve it, we can see what the sandbox gives me is it gives me my VIRL server, so 10.10.2160, that'll be my VIRL server. It gives me a VM Maestro instance, which is a Windows workstation, which is where we've installed, and you can run that GUI for VIRL that I think most people are familiar with if you've played with it. But in fact, we probably won't use that at all during today's call, because that's one of the pieces that I think most people may not be aware of, is that VIRL offers a full web interface that you can use to manage everything. You don't have to use or install that kind of thick Windows client on it. Or I guess there's Mac clients as well. In the sandbox, there's also a dev box, which is something we typically put into a lot of our Devnet sandboxes. It's usually a Linux server that's just loaded up with kind of Python and Git and Docker and other tooling you might want to make it easier. We're not going to use that as well, but it just happens to be in the sandbox. And like all of our reservable sandboxes, once it's done, I'm prompted and given access to all of the connection information. So down here at the bottom, it tells me what's the VPN address, the username and password to connect to the VPN. And so I've already VPN'd in, and I've connected up on that. So any questions so far? Does that all make sense, David?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's interesting that you're using Cisco VIRL in Devnet, but it makes a lot of sense because VIRL is this virtualized environment that runs all these virtual images. And Hank, I don't want to steal your thunder, but I'm hoping at some point you're going to tell me that special thing we spoke about earlier about the resources available in Devnet for people to use.
Yeah, we'll spell it out right here too, right? So I'm using one of our Devnet sandboxes. This one's available for anybody to use as well. We've actually got two sandboxes that use VIRL. This one I grabbed because it starts out by spinning up a Nexus topology you can go with, which is actually what it's primarily there for. But frankly, I encourage a lot of people to grab this one and just use it for any VIRL testing. So what I've actually already done is turned off or shut down the VIRL topology that starts out, because I'm going to use it as just a basic VIRL server, which is something, again, anybody can do. This one's what I would call our smaller VIRL hosted server. It would support up to 6 different Cisco devices with a mixture of non-Cisco devices. But if I come over here in our catalog, we can check out our Sandbox Labs. And if I just search for VIRL, our other VIRL sandbox actually pops up in here, and it's called our multi-iOS Cisco test network. And this one runs again on VIRL. And this is a bigger, beefier. We actually internally kind of affectionately call it the mega VIRL sandbox, because it's got a ton of capacity behind it. So it's got a couple of 100 megs of RAM, it's got several CPUs, and it's licensed for lots of devices. I don't want to quote you a number because I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's at least I think a dozen different devices, Cisco devices, and then however many servers and other things you might want to load on it. But you can reserve this one as well. And what's interesting about this one is we've kind of pre-populated it with a handful of different topologies you might be interested in. And so we can see here under VIRL simulation, I can drop the list down and we can see you can reserve it with no simulation, which means it'll start out empty. You can load up whatever you want. Or we've got a kind of a basic 8-node data center topology, 2 iOS routers, a 9 router mesh, or an extranet that's kind of made up of XR and XE and a bunch of different types of devices and topologies. So there's some choices here. Or again, oftentimes I find myself just going none so that I can use it for whatever I'm after at that point.
So hold on a minute, Hank, you've got to explain this to me. So are you saying that Cisco have a lab in Devnet that anyone can use and they can just spin up many, many VIRL devices for free?
So our sandboxes, it's available to everybody. So anybody can log in, become a Devnet member, reserve any of our sandboxes. One of our sandboxes is a VIRL sandbox, and then you can use that to spin up and use it like you would any other VIRL server. It's you can spin up as many on that VIRL sandbox. You could use it for the time, spin up a simulation, tear it down, spin up a couple of simulations if you need a couple of different ones, and use it. The reason I'm phrasing it that way is the way our sandboxes go, when you are a Devnet member, you can have one sandbox reserved at a time. So you couldn't reserve like 5 instances of this sandbox because, again, it's our capacity. But we do give everybody one sandbox at any point in time. They can go ahead and reserve it, and you could use this for whatever testing you want across. Or when you're done with this one, reserve one of our other sandboxes.
Yes, I just want to make that clear. So in other words, I could, if I'm studying for CCNA or I'm studying for CCNP, CCIE, whatever, I could reserve one of these, or this sandbox next weekend, and then I could, for a period of time, and then I could study for whatever certification exam I'm doing, or for development, which is going to be the focus of our call, for free.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that, that's what they're there for. Our sandboxes are used, again, our primary use case is for folks that are trying to do programmability in Devnet and APIs, but there's nothing that prevents you from grabbing it to use it for anything else. And frankly, we're encouraged when folks go it. All of our sandboxes include code samples and things. So if you want to grab it, maybe you're doing a bit of CCNA studying. While you're in there, you want to check out how to use netcomp for how to experiment with some of the APIs or work with Python. You'll already have the resources available, and we can point you to different learning labs and things that are kind of built, and you can take advantage of the resources. Again, 100% free. They come up, each one of them will default to a certain amount of time, but I can click in here and say, hey, I want this for 3-4 days on that side. Our sandboxes will, like I said, one sandbox at a time, and our default duration extension is for about 5 or 6 days. If you're working on a project and you need it longer than that, you can open up a ticket with our sandbox support and they can extend it out, but you can always just, once the 5 days are over, tear it down and re-reserve a new one on that side. And I always encourage folks, especially in the programmability space, to work with GitHub and store your code files and all your different pieces. So it should be pretty easy to kind of start back up, grab a new sandbox. If you're going to take a week off, you don't have to let it sit there idle. For the week you're not using it, just let it tear down, grab a new one when you're ready, and tie it back in and get ready to go.
Yeah, Hank, I'm hogging the call a bit, but I think this is an amazing resource. So basically, if I understand it right, and I don't want to repeat it too many times, but basically anyone can have access to this VIRL system running in Devnet. So it's basically running in the cloud. Mm-hmm. It's a free resource, so if people don't have enough resources on their laptop to run Cisco VIRL locally, or they have other issues, all they need to do is connect to Devnet and there's VIRL ready to use. I mean, that to me is an amazing resource.
Absolutely. And again, it is 100% free, and that's the big piece that I always want to tell. And please, we can repeat it as often as necessary. I hope everybody will go out, sign up for Devnet, take advantage of some of the resources, and use this that's out there, because they are fantastic. And even as systems get easier to install, there's nothing easier than somebody else doing it for you, which is why I actually haven't installed VIRL in a long time. For the last couple of years, I've just used the hosted ones that we offer here.
Yeah, okay, so I'll wrap that up. That's an amazing resource. So everyone, if you want to make use of this free VIRL system, sign up to Devnet. It's free. You get free access to use VIRL. You can use the system. And Hank, just one more thing so that I understand it right. If we reserve this, I can add many VIRL devices as if I'm running VIRL locally.
Yes. So once you reserve it and connect to it, it's as if you're running it locally. You VPN in, and then you get access. The number of devices you can add to your topology will depend on two main factors. One of them is the license. As I mentioned, we've got two sandboxes. This one is licensed, I think, for about a dozen, maybe 15 devices. The one I'm using today is our smaller one, and it's licensed, I believe, for 6 simultaneous Cisco devices. But you could load up, in addition to the 6 Nexus 9Ks, you could load up 4 or 5 servers to connect to them to build some topology. Once you have the VIRL system, if you've got an image for a non-Cisco device, and so this is one of the myths that we can hit right now too, is VIRL supports any simulation device that provides a virtual image, a KVM image. And so if you're working with multi-vendor and you want to load up a Juniper switch, you just need their KVM image, and you could load that into the system, and then you could add that into the topology. Same thing with anything that you can find access to, is you can load any of those up on that side.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I've been a firm supporter and believer in GNS3 because it's multi-vendor, open source multi-vendor, and I've always thought that VIRL is fantastic, but it's only good enough for Cisco devices. But you're telling me and everyone else that VIRL can support any device as long as it runs a KVM image.
Correct. Yeah. Now our simulations, obviously, our sandbox labs come preloaded with the Cisco platforms that are there. And so here I'm on the web interface, and we're going to talk a bit more about this in a bit. But we can see it's preloaded with ASAV, CSR, iOS XR, NXOS, and in addition, we can see there's a Core OS image in the middle. There's a server image down here that's, I think, Ubuntu. But you can add any KVM style image up here. It's again, VIRL's it's a simulation system. So if you bring your own image, you can load those up and take advantage of them across your simulations. It's certainly not Cisco only, and in fact, at Cisco, when we download it for internal lab use or different pieces, we actually publish some of the different images that are supported as well to go through, because it's used across the board for multi-vendor testing. And one of the common use cases I tell folks when we start to move beyond just studying for the CCNA or CCNP is include application servers. So build up a network to test out how your network changes will go, and then load up a Windows, a web server, load up your application server, and you can include those in your topologies. What we usually, again, it's got the Linux images here, but you can even run Windows servers inside of KVM images so that you could simulate actual traffic loads. And so when you build your network, you configure it appropriately. Now you can actually test to see if the applications are working as they're supposed to.
That's amazing. I mean, it's whenever I talk to you, I learn something, and I learn a lot. I mean, this is great, because just looking at your list there, you've got ASAV right at the top. ASAs are a nightmare for a lot of guys to get working on other platforms, and I mean that comes with VIRL, and you can build ASA topologies if you're studying for CCNA security or whatever using VIRL, and I can access this on the Devnet hosted solution as well. So I mean, the more I talk to you, the more I think this is fantastic, and the more excited I get. So let me shut up, Hank, and you continue with your demo.
Yeah, exactly. And the one thing I'll point out here, if people are curious, why are some of these in red? It's because the red ones, you'll see they're older versions. And so I think when we first loaded this one up, it defaulted to the 16.6 image for CSR, and then we updated it to the 16.8 image. But the older ones are there, and when you're building a topology, kind of an advanced use case, is you can go in and say, hey, by default, it's going to want the latest version of the platform or whatever's been marked as default, but you could go in and select an older version as well, which is why you see the CSR is red and this NXOS is red and this server's red. It's because we've got newer versions that are there. But let's talk about simulations. And so one of the big complaints or comments that I get from a lot of folks is they just don't like loading up VM Maestro either on their laptop or having to have some other system that's there. And I agree. It's a fine solution, but frankly, I'd much rather deal with a web interface that goes through. And so I'm just on UWM. I honestly don't remember what those letters stand for, but it's the web interface for interacting with VIRL as just a general user. And so I can see I'm on my simulations here, and I'm going to go ahead and launch a new simulation. And we'll start this whole simulation right from the web piece that's there.
So Hank, just to stop you there, what you basically are doing is you've got the VIRL VM. In this case, it's hosted on Devnet. And all you're doing is you're connecting to it with a web browser. You haven't installed any software on your laptop kind of thing.
Correct. Yep. I just hit the web page that was there. And so so when I hit the launch simulation, and so it comes up with the launch piece. And so what's the source of the simulation is the .virl file. And so under the hood, whenever you're working with VIRL, the topology file or the topology you're working with it's usually often called a .virl file or the topology VIRL file. It's an XML file that describes what's there. And one of the things we'll kind of talk about as we go through is I always encourage folks, make sure you grab those files and include them in your code repos or include them with what you're working on, because now you basically have your topology, your simulation to go. You can use it on any VIRL system as long as you've got the file. But we're going to create a new one from scratch. You can give it a name. We'll just call this the demo one that's there. And then you can see launch. What I clicked a second ago was this editor button to load up the web editor. And so that opened in a new tab. I'm just flipping between tabs here. And so this is the editor to build out what I want my simulation to look like. And so I can come through here and say, okay, you can see the nodes that are on the side, and I'm going to keep them a fairly lightweight one, just so we're not sitting around waiting for a ton of machines to boot up. So I'm going to say we're going to add this iOS v1. We'll add a couple of those. And let's say we'll add what else we'll add? We'll add a layer 2 iOS device. So just a little kind of a triangle, 2 routers, a switch that are there. So this isn't terribly impressive. Obviously, connecting devices is pretty simple. I could add links individually, or I can just hit the auto connect button that's here, and it'll just create the triangle for me. So I've got my link that's ready to go. Make sense? This, again, shouldn't seem too terribly surprising. It's not intended to, but kind of stepping us through, showing us what's there. Before I keep going, are there any questions, David?
No, I just think it's great, and just to reiterate this, you've got a web browser pointing to a VIRL VM, and you're building the topology without VM Maestro. VM Maestro is the sort of GUI application that you could use, where you install it locally. All you're doing is connecting to the VM with your browser, and you building this topology.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
That's great.
And that's the first piece, is a lot of people think they need that thick client, and you don't anymore.
Yeah.
And frankly, I barely use it ever because I can do everything through the web and some other tools that we're going to talk about. And so the other thing we'll go through down here is just remember, you can add in servers. And as I mentioned, I always encourage folks, if you're building this to test out, throw some servers. Put a web server in there, put a host so you can actually test to see if your topology is going. So you could pick any of these and add them in as well.
Just a dumb question, Hank, before you go any further. What URL do I point to? So, I mean, is it just the IP address of the VIRL server, or the VM, basically?
Yep. So if I come up here, you'll see the editor is running on a different port as it goes through. But when I first started, let me see if I can show it over here. Yeah, see, I'm just at 10.10.21.60, which is the IP address of the VIRL server from the sandbox.
Great.
And then you would log in. So all of our sandboxes use the default VIRL passwords, which is just guest and guest. So username guest, password guest, and that's all I did in advance. So so I created my topology here, 3 devices. I clicked finish, and so now I can go ahead and tweak it if I need to with what's there. So if I select, for example, one of these devices, I can come in and look at the properties, and I could assign different IP addresses to kind of give it explicit management addresses. I could tell it what I want to do from an internal gateway protocol, so routing protocols. I could turn on kind of customize OSPF settings or IBGP settings, different types of pieces. You don't have to set any of these, because one of the things that's nice about VIRL is it's got this feature built in called Auto Netkit. And so if you don't customize these settings, we'll run it in a second, it'll actually go through and say, okay, well, you built a topology. Let's give it some baseline configuration. And so Auto Netkit looks at the way that you physically cabled it, and then just kind of adds some IP addresses, turns on a couple of routing protocols, just so when it starts up, it's ready to go. But you can override some of the defaults that it gives by just adding different details that are in here. That Auto Netkit capability is one of the things that I think is really unique inside of VIRL, and some people don't recognize that it's there. And you think, well, I'll spin up the topology, and then I'll have to spend 30, 40 minutes kind of putting IP addresses on every physical interface and just doing a baseline OSPF or BGP config. But if you just want to, if you're trying to get a topology up and some traffic, definitely take advantage of this Auto Netkit, because it'll does all those for us. But like, for example, here's the first router. I can click on the second one that's here. I could customize it. I'm going to let it take the defaults and just say run Auto Netkit. And so it's running Auto Netkit in the background. We can see it tells me it's completed. And so now if I click on this config tab, it'll actually show me. So once Auto Netkit is run, I click on the device, this config tab that's over here on the side will show me the configuration that was generated. And it says it right up here, iOS config generated by Auto Netkit. And I can scroll through and see what was done. So we can see, I've always been a fan of using out-of-band management networks. And so it's even on these older devices, it goes ahead and creates me a management interface VRF, so it can throw those in there. I could look at some of just the baseline config that gets done. And then it gets down into some of the interfaces. So we can see it created loopback 0 for me. This will get used for kind of router IDs, all those pieces inside a router protocol or routing protocols. We can see that first interface is the one that kind of automatically gets identified to be the management interface. And so it's been labeled, it's on the VRF. And then we can see the other interfaces, 0, 1, and 0, 2. 0, 1 has been cabled up to go to the layer 2 switch, and it's got an IP address on it. Gigabit 0, 2 goes straight to the router. It's got an IP address on it. Again, all those IPs are kind of just Auto Netkit grabs some default ones to go through and use, but you can override any of those inside of the settings. And then OSPF is turned on, BGP is turned on, just some basic stuff has all been done. Now, I don't have to live with this. I could go in and tweak any of these pieces that I wanted to on any of these router configs to adjust it for my own baseline configuration if it was needed. So if I wanted to rename the host name, for an example, although you could do that with the properties of the device as well, so you don't have to do it manually. But again, so now I have a baseline config that's all ready to go. And I can come through here and say, okay, I want to go ahead and sync that off to UWM. So it says here, UWM synced, syncing to UWM. What this editing tool did is it created that topology VIRL file, that .virl file. And so now if I flip back over here to UWM, it says using .virl file from topology editor. You can see it's been selected there. And now I'm ready just to go ahead and click the launch button. And so this is going to start my simulation based on that topology I just built. And it's going to bring us over here, and we'll kind of be able to see it as it boots up here inside of the web interface. While that's going, this is a decent time for questions, so we will be waiting for a couple of VMs to boot. What you got for me, David?
Yeah, so I mean, this is basically, for lack of a better word, is a scripting engine that allows you to pre-build a topology. So rather than I having to go and manually configure IP addresses and routing protocols and all the rest, this just makes it dead simple to get a base config. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what Auto Netkit does, and it's one of those things that's I saw it when I first used VIRL, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. But the more that I've gone through and kind of seen what it does and some of the pieces and the convenience it offers, it's really handy. And you can override any of the settings that are there, any of the subnets, any of the assumptions that are made, and it's a piece that's just kind of always part of it. Been part of VIRL to give those types of capabilities. And again, it's baseline configuration. It gives me a topology to start with. I know that whenever I'm building a lab out, it might be fun, but I think the fourth or fifth time I have to go ahead and put IP addresses on every single interface between my devices, it gets kind of boring to redo the same thing over and over again. So,
yes, I mean, that's one big advantage is guys who know how to do all the basic stuff. could just automate it using this tool, so that they can save time getting to what they actually want to do, which could be network automation, Python, whatever. But I see another piece to this. What's also nice for someone who's very new to Cisco, like a CCNA candidate, what's nice about this is they can say, okay, create a BGP neighbor relationship in this autonomous system, and it creates the config, so you've got something to learn from. So that's also really nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been a few protocols and things even over time where I was like, oh, that's a different way to configure it, or I wouldn't have done it that way. I started doing a lot of the routing pieces way before some of the named mode configs and some of the address family pieces. And so I've actually learned how to translate stuff over to some of those newer modes just by looking at some of these sample configs that are built. So.
Yeah, I mean, it threw VRFs in there. So it had like a management VRF that basically keeps the management side separated from your lab topology type thing. Is that right? Yeah.
And so if you get like a newer model switch, whether they're a Catalyst or a Nexus switch, most of them these days have an out-of-band management port. It's yellow, it's plugged in the back, it's labeled management. The default configs on like a Nexus device, and I think the newer iOS images kind of start out with a management VRF that's there. But I remember back in the day, a lot of when we first started seeing management ports on like a 3750X and some of those, they didn't necessarily kind of default to a management VRF. And so I walked into several folks that mistakenly started adding extra layer 3 default routes into their global routing table because they were using these management ports and then putting a route on it, and then stuff kind of got weird. And so I always recommend folks, I'm a huge fan of having a management network, something separate from where your production applications run. And then the next step is make sure you're putting that, even on your edge access switches, do some sort of isolation, do a management VRF, do something so that you don't risk having those routes or those things kind of get into a table you're not expecting. So
that's great.
Mm-hmm. All right, so while we've been chatting, our simulation has started. So we can see here in the table, I'm active, they're reachable. It shows me the management IP addresses that kind of were assigned here. And then we can see some external connection information that's here. And so there's the ability to kind of connect in for console access and management access to go through. And there's different ways to kind of tackle these. But the first one I want to look at is this interesting thing up at the top called live visualization. So if I click on this one, it's going to open me up another tab, which is going to look similar to that topology editor we were looking at. And if I'm exploring a topology, trying to figure out what's going on, there we go, it's now active. We can see things are kind of popping up and getting connected. So I've now kind of live connected. This web tab is kind of linked up to the topology. And so if I click on one of these devices, we can see I can telnet into the serial port for this device. So if I click on this, it'll actually open up another web tab, and it's going to connect me to the serial port on this device. And so now right within the web interface, I'm on the device and I can configure it and go through. So again, I'm in the web, no VM Maestro, didn't have to do anything on that. And I can get connected to this, and I can look at show IP interface brief, and I can see the device again. So I'm connected directly to that device that's there. I could connect to any of the devices. So again, any of their serial ports, which would give us kind of console access for all of these devices. I get those pieces that are there. And then if I'm working through this actions menu, it gives me all sorts of interesting things that I can do across my topology, kind of en masse. And so if I'm interested in the OSPF information, I can just say collect OSPF. And so under the hood, VIRL is just running some collection commands off to the device. And then in this log, it kind of shows me all of the relevant things for OSPF. And so rather than connecting, in this case, there's only 3 devices, and 2 of them are the only ones that are doing routing from an OSPF perspective. But if I had a large topology and I wanted to see like, what's the output of show IP, OSPF neighbor, and interface brief, and all of those across all of them, VIRL gives me the ability, it pushes them all out, and then kind of gathers all that information here in this log for me. So I can snag them. I can clear the log out when I'm done. After I've captured what I needed, and I could run something else. I could say, go collect the ARP statements across all of these and show me what's there. And so again, a nice little kind of handy piece that's built right into the VIRL tool, all web-based. I don't have to do anything, and I can just kind of run these out. I can do collect the running config, interface tables. I can pull the configurations out, spanning tree details. Again, just built into the tool to make it convenient to kind of learn the current state of what's going on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's great because, again, I see 2 things here. Number one, I mean, you're using like an automation tool